HSM, how are we doing tonight? If we don't know each other, my name is Caleb. Excited to jump into a brand new series that we're starting tonight called What I Believe. And to start on a somewhat serious note, but an important note for what we're going to be doing this evening, we'll be launching off with such an important foundational question whenever we're talking about worldviews. And that question is very simply this: why is there suffering in the world? Why is there pain? Why do bad things happen to good people? And why does life just suck sometimes? The last time that I seriously had to grapple with this question was probably about a year ago. And it was a normal Thursday night for me and my family, and we were just kind of hanging out or whatever. And all of a sudden I got a phone call. And that phone call was to inform me that there was a really young boy that was playing outside and then had been hit by a car. And in that moment, they knew that it was very serious, and that boy ended up getting life flighted to the hospital, and it was my job to go to the hospital and just wait with the family while they awaited what news was going to be of this young boy. And I remember driving there and thinking, I don't know what to say, I don't know what not to say, I don't even really know exactly what to think about this. And I got there and I sat with that boy's dad, and I sat with that boy's mom and the rest of the family and friends that were involved in it. And it was almost like you could tangibly feel the emotions in the room, and sadness and frustration and anger and anxiety, and all of that just kind of swelled up to this like one huge question that I felt like everybody in the room was asking, is just why? Why would this happen to a boy that doesn't even really have an opportunity to deserve that at any point? Why does something like that happen? Why does pain like that something that we need to deal with now? And even as I tell that story, I'm sure that you're running through stories in your mind right now of past experiences of pain that maybe either you've dealt with directly or people that are close to you have had to deal with. Like, why does my grandma have cancer? Why did my friend die in a car accident? Why am I being bullied? Why did my dad lose his job? Why can't I get into the college that I want to go to and ultimately pursue what I want to? All of these instances are just small instances of pain. And what we want to do right now is figure out, hey, how do we grapple with this? How do we look at this? And in this series, what we do is we want to take our Christian worldview and our Christian beliefs and compare them and contrast them with other worldviews and other beliefs. Two reasons that we do that. One, we want to equip you with understanding beyond what we believe so that we can love people that are not like us. Oftentimes what we talk about here at LCBC is loving folks that aren't in our in-group. And these are people that think like you and believe like you, people that you would naturally associate with just because that's how life works. But we don't just want to stop and just blindly stay in with our in-groups. We want to extend out there and love people well and ultimately seek to understand them. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is one of the best ways to understand the most foundational things of a worldview is to compare it with a different one. You can start to see those points. So we're going to have some fun. We're going to jump in on this right now. And tonight we're going to be talking about Buddhism. So Buddhism. Let's start with the origin story of Buddhism. It all starts with a guy named Siddhartha Gautama, and he was a wealthy prince that lived about 2,500 years ago. There's a lot of versions of this story, so there's a lot of different reasons for this next detail, but for whatever it was, he stayed in his palace for many, many years, really primarily his whole growing up. Because of that, those that looked out for him really shielded him from all kinds of outside pain and distress and really anything that could throw him off. But he reached a certain age where he said, I'm not staying here anymore. I need to know what's out there. I need to know what life is really all about. So upon that, they let him leave the palace, and as he was exploring the kingdom, for the first time, he ran into an old person, which to you probably sounds pretty silly because we run into old folks all the time. That was the first time that he had seen the pain and the change that age can have on someone. So that was day one. So he goes back to the palace, and day two, he goes out and he explores the kingdom, and then the second time, he runs into someone that's sick. This is the first time that he had seen someone that was seriously sick. It's the first time that he had to grapple with that as a real legitimate thing. And it took him by surprise. He didn't totally know what to do with it. And then that kind of ended the second day. And then on the third day, he left the palace and he explored the kingdom. And this time he literally ran into a dead corpse. So any crime show that you've watched before, it's pretty much the first 5 minutes of that is the first time that he had seen someone die before. It's the first time that he had to confront the finality of life. So he goes back to the palace and he's thinking through, hey, I've seen this old person, I've seen this sick person, I've seen this dead person. I didn't know that I had to grapple with these things anymore, but I know that I don't have the answers to this. I know that I don't have the answers to pain. I know that I don't know how to think about suffering. So from there, he rejected the prosperity that he grew up in. And he went on a journey to explore, what is this really all about? And the route that he took was pretty much embracing poverty. So for about 6 years, he ate next to nothing. He meditated really as much as he possibly could and rejected everything else. And for 6 years, he tried to figure out, hey, what can this teach me about suffering? What can this teach me about pain? What kind of clarity or enlightenment can this bring me? And he got towards the end of that time, and it was a real tough trial run because he didn't feel like he learned what he needed to learn. So on the continuum, he started out in prosperity. On the other end, he went to poverty. And this is really important to understand Buddhism because he didn't land on either of them, but he went on to what he now refers to as the middle way. And it was as he was exploring this middle way, where he's rejecting prosperity and he's rejecting poverty, he was meditating under a tree. And in this middle way is when he started to understand enlightenment, or what it means to deal with suffering and what it means to deal with pain. And if you had to boil it all down to one major point, Buddhism, in one major point, it would be this: that you can control your pain and you can control your suffering by controlling your desire for pleasure. I'll say that again because it's important to understand Buddhism. You can control your pain in your life and the suffering that's in your life by controlling your drive for pleasure. A couple other things to understand when it comes to Buddhism. One is karma. So the idea of karma is very simply that the actions that we take have consequences that come after them. So there's good karma and bad karma. There's good consequences and bad consequences. Two more buzzwords that you can know. One is the Four Noble Truths, which basically boil down to the first truth that we had discussed of you have pain and the suffering in your life can be controlled if you're able to control your desire and your drive for pleasure. Lastly, the buzzword that you can know is the Eightfold Path. So the Four Noble Truths basically boil down to the Eightfold Path, and that's really the actionable part of Buddhism. It's really 8 steps or 8 pursuits to live a right life, a good life, a preferable life, and all of them boil down to living rightly and doing the right thing. So as we sum all this up, it's really easy to understand why Buddhism is one of the main worldviews in our world today. About 7% of the world would identify themselves as Buddhists. And really it answers, what do I do with pain? What do I do with suffering? How do I live a right, good life? All of these things are things that everyone in the world wants to do and wants to grapple with in a healthy way. So in closing, let's talk about one thing that Buddhism and Christianity have in common, and then 2 major differences. For one, let's just come out and say this. The similarity is this: suffering is real and suffering sucks. Whether you're a Buddhist or whether you're a Christian or whatever worldview you have, we said it earlier, you need to grapple with this question. There is suffering and there is hurt and there is pain in our world, and it's something that we need to deal with. So here's often how we have a tendency to think about sin, a very linear, isolated thing. So we kind of start off, and I'm primarily a good person that might do a couple of bad things, and I want to try and do as little of those bad things as possible. So you start off on a Monday morning and your alarm hits and you don't want to wake up, so you go, oh shoot, and profanity, and you cuss, and okay, then that's bad thing number 1, and you just kind of keep moving, right? So you keep moving and you get in the shower and you're thinking about your day, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, there was that test that I didn't even think about studying for. So you start scrambling, how do I work this out? How do I fix this? How do I do good on that test? And the only thing you come up with is cheating. So you're starting to think, how can I cheat on this? How can I work this somehow in my favor? And you eventually kind of think of that plan, and the period comes and the test starts, and then you decide to cheat. That's sin number 2. And then halfway through the test, as you're cheating and things are looking kind of good, all of a sudden the teacher sees it and calls you out on it. And then you choose to lie. And that's sin number 3. And you can kind of go on and on and on and say, hey, that was a good day or a bad day. It was a good day if I was able to keep my tallies down, and it was a bad day if I filled the whole thing up with tallies. The reality is, that's not the most helpful way to think about sin. See, truth about sin, everything that you experience in your life is ultimately affected by sin in some way, shape, or form. So we have a tendency to think about sin as a singular 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. The reality is sin has a tendency to affect our lives in a way that looks much more like this. And if I was going to add to it, we'd probably crank it around like this then too. Everything that we experience in our lives is in some way affected by sin. This is so important because everything that we experience in our lives is also affected by pain and suffering. See, that pain and that suffering comes from sin. And sin affects everything, pain affects everything, suffering affects everything. So what do we do then? So like we said, sin affects everything in our lives, and ultimately, because of that, pain affects everything in our lives. Suffering affects everything in our lives, which brings us to this point. Suffering can't be escaped. And as you hear that, I know right now you're like, this is literally the biggest downer of a teaching that I've ever heard in my life. And that's because we're saving the hope for last. Because while suffering can't be escaped, there is hope, very concrete hope. Two kinds of hope. There's hope for eternity, and there's hope for right now. Let's jump into that right now. I'm going to have you turn to John 3:16. It's going to be up on our screens as well. If you've ever heard just one verse from the Bible, it was probably John 3:16. And as we talk about these foundations of our faith, this is such a good verse to come back to. John 3:16 goes like this. For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. See, as humans, we were created by a perfect God to have perfect relationship with him as his perfect creation. And sin ruins that relationship with God, and it takes our perfection that he intended for us too. That's why God sent Jesus down to earth to die on the cross, to rise again from the dead, to pay the penalty for our sins, so that we can have that right relationship with him again, and so that God can see us as that perfect creation that he intended us for. We have hope for all of eternity, but because Jesus fixed that relationship, we can spend forever with him in heaven. We have hope for eternity because of Jesus. But that's not the only hope that we have. I know some of you are thinking right now, like, hey, I realize that we have hope for eternity. I realize that heaven is a thing, but Caleb, what do I do with my suffering right now? How do I think about my pain right now? Because heaven's not helping me right now. So let's check out 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6 and 7. It goes like this. So be truly glad. There is a wonderful joy ahead, even though you must endure many trials for a little while. These trials will show that your faith is genuine. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. See, if you're a Buddhist, you would describe the best life that you can live as the one that you can get as far from pain and suffering as possible. As much as I can detach from pain and suffering as possible, that's the goal. Pursuing enlightenment, pursuing nirvana, so that you can get away from pain and suffering. If you follow Jesus and you call yourself a Christian, then we would tell you that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationship with Jesus. We don't flee away from pain. We don't flee away from suffering. It's something that we embrace, because when we take these things that we struggle with, things that you're overwhelmed by, things that you don't know what to do with, things that you don't know how to respond, if you don't have enough left in your tank to deal with these things, those are the very things that you take open-handed to God and say, I don't know what to do with this. And in that moment, God will meet you right where you're at and help you through it. See, here's the beautifully paradoxical thing about following Jesus. He's going to take these situations and these feelings and these things that we need to deal with, the pain and the suffering, and those are the very things that he uses to draw us closer to him, to build our faith, to purify our faith, to build our relationship with him, to make us more dependent on him. They're the very things that he uses ultimately to accomplish his purpose in us. So take heart. I want you to think about this right now, even as we're saying it. What's that thing for you? What's the thing that's causing you pain right now? What's the thing you're uncomfortable with? What's the thing that you don't know what to do with? What's the thing that you're battling right now? What's keeping you from giving that to God? What's keeping you from giving it to him and saying, God, please use this in my life right now. I want to lift it up to you. That's where he'll meet you, right where you're at. We'll see you next week.